My name is Lila, and I'm 54 years old. Right now, I'm standing on the deck of my oceanfront home listening to waves crash against the rocks below. The salty breeze carries away 15 years of heartache, 15 years of being invisible to my own son and his family. But yesterday, something incredible happened. The moment they discovered I'd bought this beautiful house by the sea, they showed up at my doorstep with suitcases, acting like nothing had ever gone wrong between us. Before I dive into this story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Please hit that like button and subscribe if you enjoy real life stories about family second chances and finding your own path. Now, let me tell you how I went from being invisible to my own family to living my dream by the ocean. Let me take you back to where it all began. My son Marcus is 32 now, my only child, the light of my life since the day he was born. When he married Sarah 3 years ago, I thought I was gaining a daughter. Sarah was 29, blonde, energetic, and seemed to adore Marcus. I was overjoyed. After losing my husband Richard to a heart attack 3 years earlier, I desperately wanted family close to me again. At first, everything seemed perfect. Sarah would call me, ask for advice about decorating their apartment, invite me over for dinner. Marcus looked happier than I'd seen him in years. They had two beautiful children from Sarah's previous relationship, Emma, who's 8 now, and Jake, who's 5. I fell in love with those kids immediately and started thinking of myself as their grandmother. I remember the first time I sensed something changing. It was subtle at first. Sarah started declining my dinner invitations, saying they were too busy. When I'd call to chat, she'd hand the phone to Marcus immediately, like she couldn't wait to get rid of me. Marcus, bless his heart, seemed oblivious to the shift. He'd always been a peacekeeper, avoiding conflict at all costs. I tried harder to connect. I bought expensive toys for Emma and Jake, remembering how my own mother had spoiled Marcus. I organized elaborate birthday parties at my house, decorating for hours and cooking all of Sarah's favorite foods. But each time, I noticed the forced smiles, the quick departures, the excuses about early bedtimes and busy schedules. Richard had always been the one who understood people better than I did. He would have known how to handle this situation, how to bridge whatever gap was forming. Without him, I felt lost, fumbling through conversations that used to feel natural. I started second-guessing every word I said to Sarah, every gift I gave the children, every suggestion I made about family activities. The house felt enormous without Richard, and even more enormous when I realized Marcus was slowly pulling away too. He started taking Sarah's side in small disagreements, supporting her decisions to skip family gatherings I'd planned. I watched my son choose his new family over the woman who had raised him, and I didn't know how to fight for a place in his life without seeming desperate or controlling. The holidays were the worst. That first Thanksgiving without them was devastating. I had prepared a feast for 8 people just like I always did when Richard was alive. Turkey, stuffing, cranberry sauce, sweet potato casserole, and 3 different pies. I kept checking my phone, expecting Marcus to call and say they were running late. Instead, I got a text message at 2 in the afternoon. "Sorry, Mom. Sarah's family is having dinner too, maybe next year." I sat at my dining room table that night, staring at enough food to feed a small army, and cried until I couldn't breathe. The worst part wasn't even the loneliness. It was the realization that they hadn't thought to invite me to Sarah's family dinner. I wasn't considered part of their family unit anymore. Christmas was even harder. I spent weeks shopping for Emma and Jake, finding the perfect presents, wrapping them with care. I bought Sarah a beautiful cashmere scarf and Marcus a watch he'd admired months earlier. When Christmas morning came, I drove to their house with my arms full of gifts, only to find they'd already left for Sarah's parents' house in Connecticut. A neighbor told me they'd been gone since Christmas Eve. I left the presents on their doorstep and drove home in silence. When I got there, I found my own gifts from them waiting by my front door. Gift cards. A $50 card to Target from Marcus, a $25 card to Barnes and Noble from Sarah and the kids. No personal note, no family photo, nothing that suggested they'd put any thought into what I might actually want or need. My friends Patricia and Barbara noticed the change during our weekly coffee dates. They'd share stories about babysitting grandchildren and family vacations, and I'd find myself making excuses for why Marcus was too busy to visit, why Sarah was overwhelmed with the kids' schedules. The lies came easier each time, but they left a bitter taste in my mouth. I tried reaching out through social media, commenting on Sarah's Facebook posts about the children's achievements and milestones. She never responded, and eventually I realized she'd blocked me from seeing her updates entirely. The digital rejection felt almost worse than the physical distance because it was so deliberate, so final. The last straw came on my birthday 2 years ago. Marcus called that evening, clearly having forgotten until Sarah reminded him. The conversation was awkward and rushed, filled with his apologies and promises to make it up to me soon. But soon never came. After I hung up, I made a decision that surprised even me. I stopped trying. I stopped calling, stopped sending cards, stopped organizing family events that no one wanted to attend. The silence that followed was both peaceful and heartbreaking. For the first time in 2 years, I wasn't anxiously waiting for phone calls that never came or planning gatherings that would be declined. I started reading again, something I'd neglected during all those months of trying to fix my relationship with Sarah. I joined a yoga class at the community center and discovered I actually enjoyed the meditation component more than the physical poses. My garden became my sanctuary. Richard had always handled the landscaping, but I found myself drawn to the rose bushes he'd planted years earlier. Nurturing them back to health gave me a sense of purpose that had been missing from my life. I learned about soil composition and pruning techniques, spending hours researching the best ways to care for different varieties of flowers. But the loneliness remained, especially during quiet evenings when I'd see other families walking together in the neighborhood, or when I'd pass by parks full of grandparents pushing grandchildren on swings. I wondered constantly about Emma and Jake, whether they remembered me at all, whether they ever asked about the grandmother who used to spoil them with presents and attention. It was during one of these lonely periods that I ran into Helen at the grocery store. Helen had been Richard's coworker for years, and she knew Marcus from various company picnics and holiday parties. She seemed surprised to see me mentioning that she'd heard I was doing well from Marcus when she'd run into him at the bank. What she said next hit me like a physical blow. Helen casually mentioned that Marcus had asked her about my financial situation during their conversation. He'd wanted to know if I was doing okay after Richard's death, specifically whether I might need to downsize or if I had enough savings to maintain my lifestyle. She'd assured him that Richard had left me well provided for mentioning the life insurance and retirement accounts. The pieces suddenly clicked into place with horrifying clarity. Sarah hadn't been pulling away because she disliked me personally. She'd been keeping her distance because they knew I had money and she didn't want to feel obligated to help if I ever needed anything. Or worse, she was keeping me at arm's length until they might need financial help themselves. Helen continued talking, unaware of the bomb she'd just dropped. She mentioned that Marcus had seemed stressed about their mortgage payments and Sarah's student loans. My heart broke all over again, but this time it was mixed with anger. They'd been struggling financially while treating me like a pariah, and I'd never known because they'd never given me the chance to help. That night, I called Marcus directly. When he answered, I could hear Sarah in the background asking who was calling. Our conversation was stilted and uncomfortable, but I pushed through anyway, asking directly if they needed any financial help. The long pause before he answered told me everything I needed to know. "We're managing fine, Mom," he said finally, but his voice lacked conviction. After I hung up, I sat in Richard's old chair and had what I can only describe as an epiphany. I was 60 years old, and I'd been living my life waiting for other people to decide whether I was worthy of their attention. I had savings, good health, and a whole world of possibilities ahead of me. Why was I wasting it on people who clearly didn't want me in their lives? The next morning, I did something completely out of character. I drove to the coast, something I'd always talked about doing with Richard, but never actually managed during our busy years of work and parenting. The ocean had always called to me, even as a child growing up in landlocked Ohio. Richard used to joke that I was a mermaid in another life because I could spend hours just watching waves. I found myself in a small coastal town about 2 hours from my current home, walking along a cliffside path that offered stunning views of the Pacific. That's where I met Jennifer, a real estate agent who was taking photos of a for sale sign outside the most beautiful house I'd ever seen. The house was a cedar-shingled cottage perched on the edge of a cliff with floor-to-ceiling windows facing the ocean and a wraparound deck that seemed to float above the waves. Jennifer noticed me staring and struck up a conversation, assuming I was a potential buyer rather than just a curious tourist. "It's been on the market for 6 months," she explained, unlocking the front door and inviting me inside. The previous owners had to relocate suddenly for work. It's priced to sell quickly, but most people think it's too remote for everyday living. I stepped inside and felt something I hadn't experienced in years. The living room was flooded with natural light, and the sound of waves was constant but soothing rather than overwhelming. The kitchen was small but perfectly designed with a breakfast nook that looked out over tide pools and rocky outcroppings where seals liked to sunbathe. There were 3 bedrooms, which seemed excessive for just me, but I found myself imagining how I could use each space. The master bedroom had a reading nook by the window where I could drink my morning coffee while watching the sunrise over the water. One room could be my art studio, something I'd always wanted but never had space for. The third could remain a guest room just in case. Jennifer must have seen something in my expression because she started talking numbers. The price was substantial but not unreasonable, especially considering the location and the fact that oceanfront property typically appreciated quickly. More importantly, it was within my budget without requiring me to touch Richard's life insurance money or my retirement accounts. Driving home that evening, I couldn't stop thinking about the house. I kept imagining what it would feel like to wake up every morning to the sound of waves, to have my coffee on that deck, to fall asleep to the rhythm of the tide. For the first time in years, I felt excited about something that was entirely mine, something that had nothing to do with trying to fix relationships or please other people. That night, I called Jennifer and made an offer. The closing process took 2 months, during which I told absolutely no one about my plans. I wanted this decision to be completely mine, free from other people's opinions or expectations. I spent those weeks quietly researching the area, learning about local services, and planning how I'd transport my belongings. The day I got the keys was better than Christmas morning. I drove up the winding coastal road with my heart pounding, hardly believing that the beautiful house was actually mine. Jennifer had left a bottle of champagne and a note welcoming me to the community, along with phone numbers for reliable contractors and service providers. Moving day was surprisingly emotional. As I watched the moving truck pull away from my old house, I felt like I was closing the door on an entire chapter of my life. The house where I'd raised Marcus, where Richard and I had built our marriage, where I'd spent countless hours worrying about my fractured family relationships. I wasn't running away exactly, but I was definitely running toward something better. The first few weeks in my new home were magical. I established routines I'd never had before, like taking a morning walk on the beach before the tourist crowds arrived, or sitting on my deck with a glass of wine each evening as the sun set over the water. I bought myself art supplies and started painting again for the first time since college, working on abstract pieces inspired by the constantly changing colors of the ocean. My neighbors Donald and Marie were a retired couple in their 70s who had lived in the area for 20 years. They welcomed me with homemade banana bread and invitations to their weekly poker game. Through them, I met Isabella, a widow my age who had moved to the coast after her husband's death 5 years earlier. Isabella became my closest friend, someone who understood the complexity of starting over in your 50s. I joined a book club that met at the local library, participated in beach cleanup events, and even started volunteering at the animal shelter in town. For 6 months, I lived a life that was entirely my own, and I was happier than I'd been since Richard's death. I thought about Marcus and the kids often, but the constant ache of rejection had faded into something more manageable. Then I made what I thought was a harmless decision. I posted a photo on Facebook of my deck at sunset with a simple caption about feeling grateful for second chances. I hadn't posted anything personal in years, but something about that evening felt too beautiful not to share. I didn't tag my location or mention buying a house. It was just a pretty picture with a vague, optimistic message. I had no idea that this single post would change everything. 3 days after posting that photo, I woke up Saturday morning to the sound of an unfamiliar car in my driveway. I assumed it was someone lost or perhaps a delivery driver, but when I looked out my bedroom window, my heart nearly stopped. Marcus's black SUV was parked behind my car, and I could see movement inside the vehicle. I threw on a robe and rushed downstairs, trying to process what I was seeing through my front window. Marcus got out of the driver's seat, looking older and more tired than I remembered. Sarah emerged from the passenger side wearing designer sunglasses and a bright smile that seemed completely at odds with the tension I knew existed between us. Emma and Jake spilled out of the back seat, immediately running toward the ocean view and chattering excitedly about the waves. But what made my stomach drop were the suitcases. 4 large pieces of luggage plus several smaller bags and what appeared to be a cooler. This wasn't a quick visit or an impromptu drive-by. They had come prepared to stay. Sarah spotted me first through the window and waved enthusiastically as if we'd just seen each other last week instead of having no contact for 6 months. "Surprise, Mom!" She called out, her voice carrying that artificially cheerful tone she used when she wanted something. Marcus approached the front door with what I recognized as his guilty expression, the same look he'd worn as a child when he'd broken something and was hoping I wouldn't notice. "Hi, Mom," he said, when I opened the door, pulling me into an awkward hug. "We thought we'd come spend the summer with you. Sarah found your Facebook post and realized we had no idea you'd moved. This place is incredible." Emma and Jake had discovered the deck and were leaning against the railing, pointing at seabirds and asking rapid-fire questions about whether they could go swimming and if I had any beach toys. Their excitement was genuine and infectious, and despite everything, I felt my heart soften at seeing them again. They'd both grown so much in 6 months. Sarah approached with her arms spread wide for a hug, acting for all the world, like we were the closest of friends. "Lila, this is absolutely stunning," she gushed, gesturing at the house and the view. "You must have paid a fortune for oceanfront property. I had no idea you were thinking of making such a big move." I found myself mechanically going through the motions of hospitality, inviting them inside for coffee, asking about their drive, commenting on how much the children had grown. But inside, I was reeling. 6 months of silence, and now they were standing in my living room talking about spending the summer as if nothing had ever gone wrong between us. Marcus seemed genuinely amazed by the house, walking from room to room and commenting on the craftsmanship and the view from each window. "Mom, this is your dream house," he said. And for a moment, he sounded like the little boy who used to get excited about my small victories and achievements. But Sarah's reaction was different. She was calculating, asking pointed questions about square footage and property taxes, commenting on how much space I had for just one person. When she discovered the guest bedrooms, she immediately started talking about which room would work best for their family and whether the kids could share or if they'd need separate spaces. The first red flag should have been when Sarah announced that they'd brought groceries and planned to cook dinner for me as a thank you for hosting us. But as she unpacked bag after bag of food from their cooler, it became clear that these weren't ingredients for a single meal. She'd brought enough provisions for several days, maybe even a week. Marcus, meanwhile, was helping Emma and Jake explore the house, letting them claim the smaller guest room as their temporary bedroom and allowing them to scatter their toys across my formerly pristine living room. When I gently mentioned that the furniture was new and asked if they could be careful, Sarah laughed and said, "Kids will be kids. That's what makes a house a home, right?" The second red flag came when Sarah started rearranging my kitchen to accommodate all the food she'd brought. She moved my carefully organized spice rack, relocated my coffee maker to make counter space, and took over my refrigerator with containers of leftovers and snacks for the children. When I protested mildly, she waved me off. "I'm just trying to be helpful, Mom. You've been living alone for so long, you probably forgot how much space a family needs." That comment hit me like a slap. I'd been living alone by choice, finally, after years of trying desperately to make space for a family that didn't want me. But here was Sarah criticizing my lifestyle while simultaneously taking advantage of the home I'd built for myself. Dinner was the third red flag. Sarah had prepared a meal that was undeniably delicious, but throughout the entire evening she talked about our summer plans, as if it were a foregone conclusion that they'd be staying indefinitely. She mentioned signing Emma up for swimming lessons at the local community center, finding a good pediatrician in case Jake had one of his ear infections, and researching the best beaches for families with young children. Marcus nodded along with everything Sarah said, occasionally glancing at me as if checking for my approval, but never actually asking if any of these plans were acceptable to me. I realized with growing horror that they had discussed all of this in advance, making detailed plans for an extended stay in my home without ever consulting me. Emma asked innocent questions about whether she could have friends over to swim, and Jake wanted to know if I had any games or toys for him to play with when he got bored of the beach. Their questions broke my heart because they clearly saw this as a wonderful adventure with no understanding of the adult dynamics at play. After dinner, Sarah suggested that the kids get ready for bed early since they'd had such a long day. As Emma and Jake brushed their teeth in my guest bathroom, Sarah turned to me with that bright smile and said, "It's so nice that you finally have something to share with family Lila. This house was meant for more than just one person." That sentence echoed in my mind long after everyone had gone to bed. Something to share with family. As if my entire life had been empty and meaningless until they arrived to fill it. As if the 6 months of peace and happiness I'd found here meant nothing because I'd experienced them alone. I lay awake that entire night staring at the ceiling and listening to the waves crash against the rocks. In the room next to mine, I could hear Emma and Jake whispering excitedly about all the things they wanted to do the next day. Down the hall, I could hear Sarah and Marcus talking in low voices, probably planning more ways to settle into what they clearly saw as their summer vacation home. For 15 years, they had made me feel invisible, unwanted, like a burden they had to politely tolerate. Now suddenly, I had something they wanted, and they were treating me like their generous benefactor, the grandmother who was lucky to have them back in her life. But I wasn't the same woman who had sat alone at Thanksgiving dinner 3 years ago crying over a table full of food that no one would share. I wasn't the same person who had made excuses for their behavior to my friends or who had begged for scraps of attention from my own son. The next morning, I woke up before dawn, as had become my habit, and made myself coffee in what was now Sarah's reorganized kitchen. I sat on my deck in the pre-sunrise darkness, watching the horizon gradually lighten and listening to the rhythmic sound of waves that had become my daily meditation. I thought about the woman I'd been 6 months ago, desperate for any connection with my family, willing to accept crumbs of affection in exchange for financial support or free lodging. Then I thought about the woman I'd become during my months of solitude by the ocean, someone who painted sunsets and read entire books in single afternoons, someone who had meaningful conversations with neighbors and contributed to her community, someone who had learned to be content with her own company. By the time Sarah and the kids woke up, I had made my decision. I heard them moving around upstairs, Sarah's voice bright and energetic as she planned their day at the beach. Emma and Jake thundered down the stairs in their pajamas, excited to explore the tide pools they'd spotted the evening before. "Good morning, everyone," I said, my voice calmer than I felt. "I need to talk to all of you before we make any more plans." Marcus appeared in the kitchen, looking rumpled and slightly uncomfortable. He'd always been able to sense tension, even as a child, and something in my tone must have alerted him that this wasn't going to be a conversation about beach activities. Sarah bustled around making breakfast for the children, either missing my serious tone entirely or choosing to ignore it. "The kids are so excited about the beach," she said cheerfully. "Emma wants to build sandcastles, and Jake is convinced he's going to find buried treasure. Isn't that adorable?" "Please, sit down," I said firmly. "All of you, we need to talk." Emma and Jake exchanged worried glances, sensing adult tension but not understanding its source. Marcus guided them to the breakfast table while Sarah continued standing by the stove, her posture defensive now that she realized this wasn't going to be a casual chat. I looked at each of them, these people who had been the center of my world for so many years, and felt a strange mixture of love and disappointment. Love for the grandchildren who were innocent in all of this, love for the son who had been manipulated into choosing sides, and profound disappointment in the woman who had orchestrated 15 years of rejection and was now acting like nothing had ever happened. For 15 years, I began my voice, steady and clear. I have been essentially invisible to this family. Sarah, you made it clear from early in your relationship with Marcus that I wasn't welcome in your lives. Marcus, you chose to support that decision rather than fighting for a relationship with your mother. Marcus started to protest, but I held up my hand to stop him. "I'm not finished. For 15 years, I missed holidays, birthdays, school plays, family vacations, and countless small moments because you decided I didn't belong. I spent those years questioning what I had done wrong, trying to fix relationships that you had already decided were broken." Sarah's face had gone pale, but she lifted her chin defiantly. "That's not fair, Lila. We've been busy building our own family life. We can't include everyone in everything." "You didn't include me in anything," I replied calmly. "Nothing. And now, the moment you discover that I have something you want, a beautiful house and a vacation destination, you show up with suitcases and act like we're one big, happy family." Emma tugged at Marcus's sleeve, whispering questions about what was happening, why everyone looked upset. My heart broke seeing their confusion, but I knew this conversation was long overdue. "The truth is," I continued, You didn't want me in your lives when all I had to offer was love and support. But now that I have a house you'd like to use for your summer vacation, suddenly I'm family again. That's not how relationships work. That's not how love works. Marcus finally found his voice. Mom, I know we made mistakes. I know Sarah and I should have handled things differently over the years. But we're here now. Doesn't that count for something? You're here for the house, Marcus, not for me. If I were still living in my old neighborhood in a regular suburban home, would you be here with suitcases talking about spending the summer together? The silence that followed answered my question more clearly than any words could have. I stood up from the table, feeling stronger and more certain than I had in years. I love you all. I love Emma and Jake more than they will ever know. And Marcus, you will always be my son no matter what happens between us. But I will not be used for my possessions after being rejected for my love. Sarah's composure finally cracked. This is ridiculous, Lila. We drove all this way to spend time with you. We brought groceries, we cooked dinner. Emma and Jake were so excited to see their grandmother. Then you should have thought about that during the last 15 years of ignoring their grandmother, I replied. You can't erase years of rejection with one weekend of forced family time. I looked at Emma and Jake, who were now both crying softly, not understanding why the adults were fighting. Sweetheart, I said gently to Emma, Grandma loves you very much. This isn't about you or Jake. This is about grown-up problems that started long before you were old enough to understand. Then I turned back to Marcus and Sarah. I need you to pack your things and leave today. You're welcome to visit the town, enjoy the beaches, maybe find a hotel for your vacation. But you cannot stay in my home and pretend that 15 years of hurt never happened. Marcus looked stricken, finally understanding the magnitude of what his family had done. Sarah looked furious, her mask of cheerfulness completely gone now. You're seriously going to kick out your own son and grandchildren over some petty grudge? This isn't a petty grudge, I said firmly. This is me finally learning to value myself the way I should have all along. This is me setting boundaries that should have been established years ago. The next few hours were painful but necessary. Marcus tried several times to negotiate to find some middle ground that would allow them to stay. Sarah alternated between anger and attempts at manipulation, reminding me how much the children had been looking forward to their beach vacation. How difficult it would be to find accommodations on such short notice. But I held firm. I helped Emma and Jake pack their toys, explaining gently that sometimes grown-ups need time to work out their problems. I hugged them goodbye with tears in my eyes, promising that I would always love them, and that maybe someday when their parents learned how to treat family members with respect, we could spend time together again. As their SUV pulled out of my driveway, I felt a complex mixture of emotions. Sadness at saying goodbye to the grandchildren I adored, relief at reclaiming my space and my peace, and something else, something I hadn't felt in years. Pride in myself for standing up for what I deserved. That evening, I called Isabella and told her everything that had happened. She listened without judgment, offering support and validation for the difficult decision I'd made. You did the right thing, she assured me. Love isn't supposed to come with conditions, and family isn't supposed to treat you like a convenience store, only useful when they need something. I spent the following days returning my house to the peaceful sanctuary it had been before their arrival. I reorganized my kitchen, restored my living room to its former order, and reclaimed my guest rooms for their intended purposes. But more importantly, I reclaimed my sense of self-worth. The ocean continued its eternal rhythm outside my windows, indifferent to human drama, but somehow comforting in its consistency. I realized that this house, this life I'd built for myself, wasn't just a retreat from rejection. It was a declaration of independence, a statement that I deserved happiness, regardless of whether other people chose to be part of it. Over the following weeks, I threw myself back into the routines and relationships that had brought me joy during my 6 months of solitude. I painted more prolifically than ever, creating a series of ocean scenes that captured both the turbulence and tranquility of my emotional journey. I deepened my friendships with Donald Marie and Isabella, people who valued my company for its own sake rather than for what I could provide them. I also started volunteering more hours at the animal shelter, finding purpose in caring for creatures who had been abandoned or mistreated by the humans they had trusted. There was something healing about giving love to beings who had been rejected, something that helped me process my own experiences with abandonment and renewal. Marcus called 3 times during those first few weeks, each conversation becoming easier as he began to understand the depth of hurt his family had caused over the years. He apologized, genuinely taking responsibility for his role in enabling Sarah's behavior and acknowledging how much pain their rejection had caused me. But he also admitted that he didn't know how to change the dynamic in his marriage, how to stand up to Sarah's controlling tendencies without creating constant conflict in his home. I told him that I understood his position, but that understanding didn't erase the consequences of choices he had made over 15 years. Trust, once broken, required time and consistent effort to rebuild. I wasn't closing the door on a future relationship, but I also wasn't going to pretend that everything could go back to normal because of a few apologetic phone calls. Sarah never called, never apologized, never acknowledged any wrongdoing. Through Marcus, I learned that she told her friends and family that I had kicked them out for no reason, painting herself as the victim of an irrational and vindictive mother-in-law. This didn't surprise me, but it did confirm that I had made the right decision in establishing firm boundaries. The hardest part was missing Emma and Jake, wondering if they understood why I had sent them away, worrying that they would grow up thinking their grandmother didn't love them. But I reminded myself that children are more perceptive than adults often realize, and that someday when they're older, they might understand that sometimes loving someone means refusing to accept poor treatment, even from family. As autumn approached, bringing shorter days and stormy seas, I reflected on the year that had changed my life so completely. 12 months earlier, I had been a lonely widow, desperate for any connection with her family, willing to accept scraps of attention in exchange for my dignity. Now I was a woman who had learned to value her own company, who had built meaningful relationships based on mutual respect, who had created a home that reflected her true self, rather than her attempts to please others. The lesson I learned isn't that family doesn't matter. Family matters enormously, but real family treats each other with love, respect, and consideration. Real family doesn't show up only when they want something, doesn't disappear for 15 years, and then act like nothing happened when it's convenient for them. I learned that self-respect isn't selfish, that setting boundaries isn't cruel, and that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable poor behavior, even when it comes from people you love desperately. Most importantly, I learned that happiness doesn't require other people's permission. The sound of waves outside my window, the satisfaction of a painting completed the warmth of genuine friendship with people who choose to know me. These things don't depend on anyone else's approval or presence. As I sit here now watching another spectacular sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, I'm grateful for the journey that brought me to this place. Even the pain, even the rejection, even the loneliness contributed to the woman I've become. Someone who knows her worth. Someone who won't settle for less than she deserves. Someone who has learned that the most important relationship you'll ever have is the one with yourself. What do you think? Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with family members who took advantage of your love? Have you found the courage to choose self-respect over keeping the peace? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like and subscribe for more real-life stories about finding strength in unexpected places. And please, share this with anyone who might need to hear that they deserve better treatment from the people they love. Thank you for listening to my story. And remember that it's never too late to start living the life you truly deserve. May you find the courage to choose yourself when others won't choose you. And may you discover that peace often comes not from getting what we want from others, but from learning to give ourselves what we need.